Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits, celebrating another lap around the track, and I'll get to that in a few moments. On this April Fool's Eve, there'll be no fooling around when it comes to me going all in on everything that's happening in the world of sports, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard, and for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And for those who are watching on Spotify or on the YouTube channel at J Reels, you got to be wondering, am I going for a job interview? Why am I all dressed up in a button-down white shirt and a tie on this Monday, March 31st in the year of our Lord 2025? Well, yours truly, talking about that lap around the track or lap around the sun, as a lot of people may say, I have turned 56. So yes, whether that be Thomas Hollywood Henderson, Brian McRae of the 97 New York Mets, and of course the biggest 56 of all time, none other than LT Lawrence Taylor. That is the age that I turned today. So I am beyond grateful, beyond thankful to see another year. And I just only hope that this year brings a lot of prosperity and, of course, good blessings, good fortune, not only for yours truly, but of course for the podcast and obviously with you guys and gals out there and all of your undying and unwavering continued support. I appreciate you. So with that being said, if you haven't subscribed, rated, reviewed, gone to the YouTube channel at J Reels, Apple, Spotify, any podcast platform that you listen to, please go ahead and do so. That would be the best birthday gift that you could ever give to me. So if you could go ahead and do that, I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate that. And I usually say that at the end of every podcast, but considering the day and considering how I'm dressed and ready for the occasion, I just thought to put that there right from the jump, and hopefully you go ahead and do so. And one more time, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. All right, now let's get to it. The Final Four is set. College basketball now could raise the curtain on only the second instance in the history of the tournament where you're going to have 4 1 seeds represent here in San Antonio come Saturday, late afternoon, early evening. And to just take a big, giant 30,000 foot view of this, I mean, this is a tournament, let's face it. I understand you had some moments here, whether it was Maryland beating Colorado State, even though you had the extra step there by Derek Queen, and St. John's getting ousted there early by Arkansas, where Arkansas, a brutal loss there on Thursday night, up 13 with about, 5 minutes to go to Texas Tech. And then they did their own version of Arkansas by pulling that stunt against Florida. And of course, I'll get to that in a little bit. And you've had a couple of other instances where you've had some remarkable moments, maybe not the variety of a last-second shot, a buzzer beater, anything of that ilk. But at the same time, when we take a look at what has transpired here over the course of the first 2 big weekends in this March Madness tournament, I'm sorry, there is nothing to write home about. And I get it. Not every one of these games are going to come down to the wire. It's not going to be in buzzer beater fashion. It's not going to be as thrilling with a bunch of lead changes and just intense basketball that is going to take you back to maybe tournaments past. But this one, although as expected, because if you recall 2 Thursdays ago when I talked about previewing this whole tournament, how this was going to be very top heavy, that you were going to have a lot of these, not only just with the 1 seeds, and I did talk about that, which 1 seed will get here, which any of these 1 seeds will get knocked off along the way. And as it is, that has not been the case. And just detailing what I thought that this tournament would be, that there would not be a tremendous amount of upsets, or a lot of the double-digit seeded teams are going to make a run and have the glass slipper fit them to maybe get to a regional final or Final Four. That certainly has not been the case. But as of right this very moment, at least we could look ahead and only hope and pray and keep our fingers crossed that we could have not only 1, not 2, but 3 epic games on the horizon with these 4 1 seeds that we have not seen since the year 2008. Of course, that was when you had North Carolina, UCLA, Memphis, and Kansas, and of course the champion being Kansas that year. And we've talked about that here over the course of the last 2 weeks. But overall, this has not been a tournament that one is going to look back on and say, oh, wow, that was a tournament to remember. And I get it. It's not going to be every year. You're not going to have all the thrills and the chills and the nail-biting type of games. I get that. But at least we could see, even with this past weekend, we thought that we were going to get a lot of that, considering you had a lot of top-seeded teams that were there. I mean, think about this. Your final four in each region had 1 versus 2 seed, except for Florida versus Texas Tech, and Texas Tech was a 3 seed. So it's not as if you had a Cinderella, it's not as if you had a 6 seed or even a 4 seed get to the point where, and generally the 4 is going to play the 1 if they get that far, as we've seen, but you're not going to get a scenario where coming into this weekend, we thought that this was going to be nothing but high stakes and literally edge of your seat basketball, to where it was going to boil down to a play or two. And yes, we did see a couple of instances early on in the Thursday and Friday games, but for the big giant picture, we didn't really get to sink our teeth into madness that we thought, at least for me, was going to expect here, that we didn't really see in the first weekend. So with that aside, let's get right to it, and we'll go through not necessarily every single game. I just want to go through the seeds that make it there, the 1 seeds as we know. And I'll start off by saying this. When we look at the 4 1 seeds that are left, and of course that being Duke, Auburn, Houston, and Florida, we could argue that Duke may be the most complete team. They may be the team that certainly could be the favorite going into this weekend, considering that they've had a cakewalk. And let's face it, their route to the Final Four has been very easy. And I talked about that even going back 2 Mondays ago when we're looking at the brackets and saying, wait a minute, Duke has literally a red carpet to get to San Antonio, where the other 3 regions aren't going to be as difficult. And as it was for Duke, now granted, Arizona, they played very well in the game, and Caleb Love had a monster game, and I'm sure he tried to stick it to the Blue Devils and their fans, considering he's a North Carolina guy, and of course transferred out there to the desert, but they were unable to just muster up any type of key offensive stretches to where they could get back and even threaten Duke at any point in that regional semifinal. And then for Duke to play Alabama, and Alabama who just dismantled BYU. And to think, I talked about how Alabama, the first one to 85, is probably going to be the winner. Well, guess what? They scored 113 in the game. And even though BYU scored 88, but you had an NBA score when it was all said and done, and we kind of thought that was going to be the case. And with Alabama just shooting the lights out of the ball, and Mark Sears shooting threes all over the place, record threes, 25 made in the game. I mean, just a remarkable shooting spree, which right then and there, as I was watching the game there on Thursday night, I said there was no way they're going to duplicate this and even come close to beating Duke. Now, even if they shot half of that, they would have been in the game. And as you saw, it was pretty much what we expected. They weren't going to come close to what we saw there against BYU. Duke pretty much had control of the game from start to finish. And even though Alabama made their runs, but nothing to the extent where we thought that, oh, Duke is going to be in danger of losing this game. So you had Duke cutting down the nets in Newark. No shock there as they move on and advance there. As we know, that is team number 1. The second team that I want to get into is Auburn, because they're the number 1 team overall coming into this tournament. And they had a tough sled of it. And generally when you have games in a tournament that are going to be dicey, that you're going to have your backs up against the wall, and what we saw there with Auburn against Michigan there when they were down 48-39 with about 12 and a half minutes to go, which is similar to other teams that had to come back from deficits like that, which I'll get into. But for Auburn, who stood ground, and even though Michigan looked like they were ready to maybe get themselves a shot to advance to a regional final against their in-state rival, Michigan State, but Auburn then turned on the Jets. They had a just astounding last 12 minutes of the game. You have to give it up for Janai Broome and what he's been able to do, and Denver Jones and guys like that were able to drag their team out of the fire and put themselves in a position to where they went going away. When you think about it, the final was what, 78-65? And even though that 9-point deficit in any, no matter college or pro, could be erased within seconds, but as you saw there, methodically, they just stuck to their game plan. They were able to just go ahead and steamroll the Wolverines to the point where Michigan was just left standing, not knowing what happened. So Auburn advanced, and then yesterday what you saw against Michigan State, they got up to that big lead there early when they had that 17-0 run, and even though Michigan State made their run and tried to make it interesting, but there was no threat, and despite the fact that the final score was 70-64, it wasn't any indication that the score was close. Now, you did have a scare there with Janai Broome, who had a double-double at the half, I believe ended, 25 points, 13 rebounds. He fell to the court where he landed on his right elbow, and there was a lot of concern whether or not after he left the court, and who knows what the extent of the injury was going to be, but based on the early returns that the x-rays show that they're negative, and I would think with a lot of treatment and certainly whatever rehab that needs to be taking place between now and Saturday, unless they, and of course I'm kidding when I say this, chop his arm off, and even then I'm sure he'll still go in there left-handed. But for Janai Broom, who's had a big year, as you know, and the same for the Auburn Tigers, they were able to win rather convincingly there after the scare against the Wolverines on Friday. And then you had the Houston Cougars, who had their own scare with Purdue back and forth, and we know Purdue made it to the national championship there last year, but what an inbounds play that you saw as the game down to its final seconds. And I get it, we haven't had a lot of these thrills here in this tournament, but that would have been a situation where I thought that even if that game would have went to overtime, despite the fact that Houston and their defensive prowess, someone would have told me that Purdue and their coach Matt Painter would have somehow, some way would have figured out a way to win that game. And that's not to knock Kelvin Sampson and what Houston has been able to do, not only throughout the year, but in this tournament. But that inbounds play, which was just unbelievable to Milos Uzan, who inbounded the pass and then got it right there underneath the basket. And even though it looked like the defender was going to go up and try to attempt to block his layup or even his dunk for that matter, but he was able to squeeze it through. They got that final bucket there to make it 62-60, and they went in a sweat how the Cougars were able to prevail and move on to play Tennessee. And Tennessee was a team that we thought was going to be a back and forth, defensive, just lockdown, street fight type of game there yesterday. And what you saw there by the Cougars, they just dominated. They held the Volunteers to 15 first half points. And when you knew that was going to happen, they were up by 19 at the half. And it was just a matter of time before the Cougars were going to cut down the nets and get back to a Final Four for the first time in 4 years, where they lost to Baylor there in that Final Four. And you have to give it up. Kelvin Sampson has done a tremendous job here. Back to a Final Four again, third time as coach. Remember with Oklahoma there many moons ago. And then now with the way they performed, Emmanuel Sharp, who had 14 points in that second half, shooting threes all over the place. And the Cougars went going away. And they're going to be a tough out here. We know about their defense. We know about their tenacity. We know how they just love to lock down their opponents. But for Houston, they're able to get back to this spot, and hopefully they'll be able to seal the deal. But they're a team that certainly had to sweat out that one game against Purdue, which all these teams do, except for Duke. And that's going to be an interesting theory and scenario as we move forward. And I'll talk more about them on Thursday's podcast. But the Cougars moving along. And then you have Florida, where the Gators against Maryland, close there at the half, only a couple of points. And even though Maryland has a very good starting five and they're not very deep, but Florida were able to just pull away there, steady play, second half, for them to just go ahead. And I'm not going to say they ran away with the game, but certainly were in cruise control and knew that Maryland was not going to be a threat there in that second half. So the Gators prevailed. And then they faced Texas Tech, who beat Ole Miss in a very good game, but for the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And think about it. The Texas Tech team against Ole Miss, they were down big time in that game. And then they come all the way back where Ole Miss certainly showed up and showed out in this tournament, although a bit of disappointment. And then now Florida were facing the same situation that Ole Miss did in their regional semifinal game, where they were down 9 points with about 3 minutes to go. And let me just pull up that score there real quick. I think it was what, 70, I want to say it was 75-66, if I'm not mistaken. And then for them to be down in that point of the game, and we saw that with UConn, if you recall, they seem to be going through the motions. UConn obviously was playing their brand of basketball. Walter Clayton Jr., the number one All-American, as we know, who did not play a good game up until about the last 6 to 8 minutes of the game against UConn. And then what did he do? He did another Houdini Steph Curry act where they were down by 3 there late with about a minute and a half to go, and he made that three-pointer to take the lead and then iced it with that three-pointer where he was just dribbling around and just got to the top of the key with a step back and almost in a fadeaway motion, made the three, which was the dagger against Texas Tech. And I know that the Red Raiders, they probably still haven't slept since that loss. But again, for Florida to pull that game out the way they did, considering what happened there against UConn, and maybe a little dicey against Maryland in that first half, it could be one of two things. You can look at a team that maybe gets off to a slow start, and then all of a sudden they flick the switch, which is dangerous this time of year. But then the other side of that coin shows that they have the toughness, they have the grit, they have the mettle, and even though they're all one seeds here left, but a lot of people, including yours truly, feel that Florida was the best team in the country, despite the fact that they weren't coming into this tournament as the number one team overall, that of course being Auburn. So with Walter Clayton Jr. pulling out his heroics and knowing what it takes to win these nail-biter close type of games, you have to think that Florida does have a slight advantage, despite the fact that Auburn is number one and Duke is probably coming in as the hottest team. But now, as I will just leave it here, because I want to unpack more of this on Thursday's podcast. Obviously, all these teams are deserving to be here. You wouldn't be surprised if any of these four teams win a national championship. And even if you were to rank it, a lot of people may think that Houston could be out of the top four, maybe fourth along those lines. And they shouldn't take a backseat to anybody, but because you look at what Duke has, and not only they are just not the Cooper Flag show, they have Colin Knuppel, they have Tyrese Proctor, they have very good players. And then we can look at Auburn, number one team, led by Janai Broome, amongst the other cast of characters that are on that team, as I mentioned earlier, the Denver Joneses of the world, etc. And for the Florida Gators, with their All-American in hand and what they've been able to put forth here behind their head coach, Todd Golden. Again, they are slight favorites. You can't look at any one of these four teams and think that, well, no, they're definitely not going to win a national championship. Now, I think the matchup that the nation would want to see here, and that's no offense to the two teams that wouldn't make it, in my eyes, to a national championship, I'm sure everybody wants to see Florida and Duke go at it. I think that would be a fantastic Final Four, and it doesn't matter which teams end up in the Final Four. You can have Florida, you can have Houston. Let me just pull up my bracket here, because then I'm also going to talk about my bracket before we move it along. You could have a Florida Duke, I think, would just be a ratings bonanza. I mean, Duke is Duke, and I can't stand them, as we all know. But when you have those teams that are going to be there, you can have Auburn, Houston, Duke, Florida, Florida, Houston, or Auburn, Duke. Any one of those four would be great. Now, I'm sure a lot of people would want to see Florida and Duke, maybe even Auburn and Duke for that matter, because Auburn being that team that had pretty much led from in front all year, and Duke was a number two, if you want to argue, all year long, where Florida may have flip-flopped there with Houston, and even though Houston was number one early this year. But I really believe that Florida-Duke would be the national championship game, in my eyes, that a lot of people would like to see, whether it's the casual sports fan or even just the good college basketball fan. Maybe they would probably want to see maybe more of a defensive-minded Houston team go up against either Florida or Auburn, and they don't want to see Duke, or maybe they do want to see Duke because they want to see now Cooper Flag up against this competition, knowing that he's going to go up against a defensive lockdown team in Houston, and then whomever comes out of Auburn, Florida. I mean, you have, like I said, a college basketball just wet dream, to put it bluntly. So we will see. We'll talk more about these matchups there on Thursday's podcast. Again, the tournament has not really lived up to its billing, at least to my estimation, despite the fact that we have a lot of the 1s and 2 seeds here into this past weekend, and thinking that we were going to get classic games and regional final games. I understand not everyone can be Duke, Kentucky, regional final 1992. I understand that, but still, it has certainly been underwhelming here to this point to see how March Madness has really been March blondness or even March sadness. I mean, whatever adjectives, whatever phrase you want to coin, to me, in my eyes, it certainly hasn't been anything but what I've expected or what I was hoping for here so far in this tournament. So that'll pretty much wrap that up. Let me move it along here and get to the NBAs. I keep the high tops on. And a couple of things of note here. The first one being the Memphis Grizzlies. And I understand that they were in a bit of a tailspin. They lost 4 or 5, and then they lost to the Lakers there under their interim head coach, which I'll get to. But for the Grizzlies and their front office, in particular Zach Kleiman, because he was the only one that made this decision. He didn't get any consultation from the players or even from the coaches, from what I understand, but certainly from the players. So he didn't go to the John Morants or the Jaren Jacksons of the world to say, hey, we're thinking about doing this, or how's the relationship been between coach and player, etc. He said, no, this is all on me. So before you start speculating about John Morant being a coach killer or any of the other guys on the team, or maybe it was a situation where it came from up top from management or ownership to say, we want Jenkins out, we need a new voice. Now, the timing couldn't have been any better, or maybe in this case, it probably was the best timing. As the playoffs near and the Memphis Grizzlies have had a very good year, despite their recent stretch. Because the Grizzlies have been hovering between that 2 and 5 seed, and for the most part of the year, they've been 2 and 3, flip-flopping with the Houston Rockets. But with Taylor Jenkins, who has been by far the most successful coach in Grizzly history, and that's not saying a lot, unfortunately, but considering that he's been a staple and a mainstay there and has turned that franchise around, for them to pull the plug here, and this is me from afar, I'm a little bit surprised. Ride this out. Have that meeting with the head coach to kind of take the temperature of the coach, of the team, etc. And if they happen to fizzle out in the first round, whether they be a 3 seed, 4, etc., then at that point, you cut bait. I thought it was a little premature if you ask me. It's not as if they were in a stretch where they lost 8 of 12 or the team was unraveling. And obviously, I don't know. I'm not in that locker room or anywhere near Memphis, Tennessee to gauge whether or not there's been a disconnect or there's been some discord there with the players and the coach. But I found it very puzzling to know that here it is 2 weeks before the playoffs, and now you're bringing in, make sure I pronounce his name correctly, and then you anoint as the interim coach Tuomas Ilsaya. Am I saying that right? Or Isalo? And of course, I wouldn't know Isalo if he fell on me, but for Jenkins, who, like I said, has done a masterful job, and even having to navigate everything over the last few years, the off-the-court stuff with John Morant, then him coming back last year after the suspension, and then him getting hurt and having to sit out the rest of the year, I believe with that bad shoulder, and then coming into this year, knowing that there were going to be expectations. Could John Morant even be close to the All-NBA player that he was? And although he hasn't really been that this year, still a dynamic player, but certainly not one of the top 10 or 15 players, at least for this year. And they've still done a very good job, despite the fact that they've fallen on hard times here just recently. But I really thought that, again, I understand not knowing the whole scenario there and just reading what the GM had to say. Of course, again, Zach Kleiman, I thought it was a little bit premature. You only have about 8 or 9 games left in the season, and I get it. You want to huddle your team around and say, hey, whatever's going on here, let's just plow through the rest of this regular season, get ready for the postseason, and let's have a deep run. And if for whatever the reason, they get to a second round and they lose in 5, or they fizzle out in the first round, losing in 6, or maybe they get to a hard-fought 7-game series and they lose, and maybe you still want to pull the plug on your coach. All right, I guess you could do that. Right now, very questionable. I don't know if this Ilsalo is going to be the guy that's going to be able to help this team, and I'm sure he's going to do whatever it takes, because now he's probably thinking, well, I may have a coaching job if our team plays well, and if I do well here during this final stretch of the regular season and obviously into the playoffs. But a lot of just surprising news there coming out of Memphis, as right now they're currently 5th in the Western Conference, but still within distance of maybe even getting as high as 3. I don't know if they're definitely not going to get a 2 seed, because the Rockets, I think, as of right now, even with a 2-game lead with 8 to go, I think they'll be all right, barring just a collapse here down the stretch. But they could get as high as 3, as they're just 2 games behind the Denver Nuggets. And even though that may be a bit of a stretch right now, but I would think they have something to play for. Maybe at least play for a 4 seed. At least you're going to have the home court in your building. And you're going to go up against a Laker team, which we all know. They're going to be determined. They're going to be ready. Luka is going to see if he can get back to a final that he did last year in Dallas. And we all know LeBron, even at 40 years of age, he's going to try to get back to the NBA mountaintop at least one last time before he calls it quits, whenever that may be in his illustrious career. So that's what you have there with the Grizzlies. Very surprised by what happened there, but hey, they know better than I do. And then you have the situation last night with the Pistons and Timberwolves, where you had 7 players ejected and just a fracas behind the basket, where Naz Reid went up for a layup and Ron Holland fouled him. But then, of course, Isaiah Stewart is there, and you have the modern day 2.0 bad boys of the Detroit Pistons, where Naz Reid had a finger in Ron Holland, and then Stewart came in, and then Dante DiVincenzo. it did spill into the crowd. Thankfully, it wasn't malice at the palace like if you're dating back to 2004 with an aforementioned Piston team that had Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, well, you know the players, but certainly did not have that reputation the way this team does. And I will say this, I do like that this team has some edginess, that it has some chippiness. I wonder whether or not if it's a lot of just bluster and bravado. That's not to knock Isaiah Stewart or even Ron Holland, who's come in here and now is blended in with this team as one that has some, I don't want to say intimidation, but they do provide some physicality. They do provide that shield for the Cade Cunninghams of the world and guys that are certainly going to be the stars that are going to carry this team to any success here once the Pistons start this postseason 2 weeks, or in fact, a week from this coming Saturday. Make sure I got that right. A week from this coming Saturday. Yes, that is correct. But this Piston team that have flexed their muscles even over the last couple of years. Isaiah Stewart going eye to eye with LeBron that one time, and instances throughout the course of the year where not backing down and just standing ground and making sure that he's a policeman there on the court. I understand it's not hockey, but again, there is an identity with this Piston team. And are they the 2.0 bad boys of yesteryear in the Motor City? I guess you could say so. Because not to say that this team is going to be confused with Dennis Rodman and Rick Mahorn and John Sally and, of course, the Hall of Famers that litter that team, whether it's Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars. But for the guys that were part of that front court, Bill Laimbeer, how can you forget him? This is a team that is going to harken back to those days, especially when they get to the playoffs, because they can have good regular season success that they've had this year, but that has to translate. Because the Bad Boys won back-to-back titles in the late 80s, early 90s. They've had success and sustained success throughout that decade. Granted that early on they got thwarted by the Celtics, and then they did what they did there in the late 80s by getting 2 finals, losing to the Lakers, then beating the Lakers, and then beating Portland the year after. So they're going to have that reputation be backed by some success in the playoffs. Now, if they win around, and right now they're currently fit where they'll play the Pacers, ironically, with the Malice at the Palace. That was the team, as we all know, that took place there 20-some-odd years ago in the regular season. But for Detroit, I like that they have this identity, and people could come out and say, fake tough guys, and who are they, and blah, blah, blah. Well, listen, now they're going to have to back it up. They show that they will stand for their teammates. They show that they will stand ground, that they're not to be pushed around, that this isn't the Piston team that has been squandering here for the last decade plus. This is a team that they're going to try to show and prove not only that they belong, but they're not going to be pushed around. And I like that. Because the NBA, we haven't seen a type of team like this where they're going to be able to take on whatever pressure that may be. And I understand maybe not in the NBA media circles, but once they get to the playoffs, people are going to see, all right, well, let's see them back this up come mid to late April and maybe even into May for that matter. So let's see. I'm looking forward to it. I give them credit. I do need to see a little bit more. I'm not trying to anoint this team to be anything close to what the championship predecessors were. But listen, with a league that's all about handshakes and fraternization and yuck, and this and that, sans Dylan Brooks, and I'll get to him in a second. But I like it. It's refreshing. I think the league needs it. I don't know if it's going to be a copycat league where other teams are going to try to have that carbon copy where they could have some physicality or have a team that's going to stand on their own and not be just manhandled by other teams. And not to say the NBA is like that in this day and age, but you understand where I'm coming from. So kudos to the Pistons. If I deem them the Bad Boys 2.0, I'll say right now, somewhat. Let me see them have some success here, not only in this playoff, but in years to come, and then we can talk about it. Because you can't be called the Pistons Bad Boys 2.0 and sputter in the first round or not get past a conference final when those teams in the past obviously had big-time success. So that's what I had with the Pistons. And then you had Kevin Durant, this is twofold, leaves the game yesterday against Houston, suffering a left ankle sprain where he's going to get an MRI today. He's not making the trip on their 3-game road trip starting in Milwaukee. I believe that's tomorrow. So for the Suns who are just trying to get to the finish line, we've talked about the Suns here ad nauseum over the last several weeks. And even though they're right now on the fringe and on the cusp, but they're on the outside looking in for the play-in tournament, and not that they're probably going to have any shelf life in the playing scenario because it's one and done for them. And even if they win the one game, they have to play the winner of the 7-8 game, or excuse me, the loser of the 7-8 game. So for the Pistons, if they're not going to have Durant there, that's going to be a significant blow in order for them to make it to the play-in tournament, which will begin 2 weeks from tomorrow. Oh, let me make sure I got that right. Yes, 2 weeks from tomorrow, because the end of the regular season is the following Sunday. So that's 2 weeks from yesterday. So we'll wait and see what's going to happen there. And then earlier in the game, you had Dylan Brooks, who was ejected from the game because he had gotten into a tie-up with Kevin Durant, and then had another player come across and got into a little bit of a shoving match with him, and then gets ejected. Now, he shouldn't have got ejected. To me, that was just ticky-tack. But, of course, with his reputation that Dylan Brooks has, and that's going to carry with him throughout the rest of his NBA career, he got ejected, and I don't know what that means as far as suspensions. I don't know how many technicals that he's had here throughout the course of the regular year. But for Houston, who has played well, like I mentioned, 2 seed, not necessarily entrenched, but they do have the upper hand right now. Modest 3-game winning streak with that 2-game lead over the Nuggets as of right this very moment. But for Dylan Brooks, again, another tough guy in the league, been around Memphis, as we all know, now Houston, as they're trying to see maybe they could become the Pistons of the Western Conference. We'll see, but that's obviously down the road. And that's pretty much what you have at the NBA. Nothing else that sticks out other than the Cavaliers win 60 games without LeBron James. And the reason why I say that, because the Cavs have never won 60 games without him. So they have done so with them. But even with their 60th win, the Oklahoma City Thunder have the best record in the sport, 62-12. The Cavs are 60-15. So it's looking like the Oklahoma City Thunder will have home court throughout the entire postseason based on their best record. So just keep that in mind. And then the Celtics, who have cut their lead in the conference to 4 games and a loss, 4.5, but with only 8 or 9 games to go, depending on where you're at. 7 to 8 games. The Celtics have 8 more games. Cavs have 7. They are still going to be in good stead to have the home court throughout the East at least. But the Celtics have won 8 in a row, and this is without the last few games. Jason Tatum, who suffered an ankle injury where he landed on Domantas Sabonis, turned his ankle, and all I'll say is this. When I saw that, it brought me back to Game 7 against the Miami Heat in that Eastern Conference Final 2 years ago, where on the first offensive series of the game, he turned his ankle and, of course, was not the same player. And thankfully, this happened now because all the Celtics could do, just rest him. Let him be close to 100%. You want to give him a little bit of a tune-up in the last week of the season in a couple of games. Let him play 18, 20 minutes just to break out a sweat, get himself back into game shape. Do it. Because then you'll have that 5-day layoff from that final day Sunday, really 6-day, to Saturday, or depending on when they'll play. They may have a whole week off if they don't play until Sunday, 1 o'clock, which is usually where the Celtics have that first window there on the opening weekend of the postseason. So I would rest them, and I'm sure that's what the Celtics are going to do. They're not going to rush them back by any stretch. They're entrenched in the 2. There's no reason to rush them back by any means. But the Celtics have won 8 in a row and have played well, and maybe, who knows, peaking at the right time as they head into the postseason to defend their NBA championship of a year ago. I would only hope that's going to be the case, so we'll certainly see what's going to happen there. But besides that, what can I say? Bucks have not played well since the loss of Damian Lillard. Who knows if he's going to return, as he has that blood clot issue in his calf. Now that the Bucks are 6th in the conference and they've lost 4 in a row, you have to wonder whether or not they're either going to get as high as 5, because although they're a game back and a game and a half in the standings by the Pistons, they'll be entrenched in the 6th because there's no way Atlanta's going to catch them. But now you have to wonder whether or not the Bucks are going to have any length or legs in this postseason. It's certainly going to have to fall on the shoulders of Giannis Antetokounmpo. Right now, it looks like they're going to be a Bucks-Knicks first-round playoff series, which will be interesting. But I think with the Knicks and Jalen Brunson, last I read is that he will be ready for the playoffs. Who knows if he's going to get a game or 2 as a warm-up heading into the middle of April. So that we'll have to wait and see as far as his ankle, where he rolled that up in LA a few weeks ago. And obviously he's on the mend, so we'll have to wait and see what his status is going to be, whether or not he's going to play at all in the regular season, or he's going to jump right into the fire there, game 1 in that opening weekend against the Bucks, or at least so we think. And other than that, and in the Western Conference, we talked about that 2 through 5 and 7 through 10. It's pretty much status quo. Now for the 6, 7, 8, 9, because we know about 2 through 5, we've already discussed that. But the Warriors, who are currently a half game ahead of the T-Wolves. T-Wolves are in the 7th seed right now. Clippers T-Wolves will be a very interesting 7-8 first round matchup where the game would be in Minnesota. But the Clippers, who have a game in hand, they're tied in the loss with 32, but are a half game behind them. So with that one game in hand, who knows if that's going to be beneficial to the Clippers as we get down to the stretch of the season. And then give it up for the Mavericks. They played well here, they pieced it together, and they haven't had major contributions from Anthony Davis. So for the Mavericks, who are fighting to get into that playing scenario, now they would be able, as of right now, host a first round game because the Sacramento Kings have not played well. So for Dallas, who are currently 37-38, and even though the Kings have a game in hand, they're 36-38, where the Suns are 35-40, as they are 2 games behind them in the loss and a game and a half behind Sacramento for that 10 seed. So as it is right now, Dallas hoping to hang on there, maybe even host a home game. And who knows, maybe they can advance and play the 7-8. Right now, I get it, that's more of a moral victory than anything. But at least if you're the Mavericks, you have something to root for in a last couple of months that has been just a flat-out disaster, as we know. So let's see how this is all going to shake down. And as far as the schedule here over the next few days before we get to Thursday's podcast, and we'll regroup and see where we're at then. Tonight you have the Clippers in Orlando. Boston at Memphis. There you go, interesting game there. Brooklyn at Dallas, only because the Mavericks. Houston at LA to play the Lakers. Those are your key matchups there, and they're on TNT tonight. So you don't even have Tuesday. Oh, as a matter of fact, you have 2 doubleheader games tonight and tomorrow. I guess because they lost those games over the course of the last couple of weeks because of the tournament. Tomorrow, your TNT games are Phoenix at Milwaukee, Minnesota at Denver. Then you have Golden State, Memphis. And that's pretty much it. As far as any key games, I know Orlando at San Antonio, because Orlando, I'm not even getting into the 7 through 10 in the East. That's a disaster. Then Wednesday, your ESPN doubleheader, New York at Cleveland. And that's going to be a big game for the Knicks. And I know no Jalen Brunson, but as you recall, they are 0-2 against the Cavs this year, 0-3 against the Celtics this year, and 0-2 against Oklahoma City. So they're 0-7 against the teams that are ahead of them in the standings, whether it be in the East or West. Now, they did beat Denver twice, so that you have to give it up. But Denver is also a 3 seed, similar to the Knicks right now in their own respective conference. So that is the first of the double dip. And then Detroit at Oklahoma City. Very good game there, and an interesting test for the Pistons that we'll see. That is your ESPN doubleheader on Wednesday. Then you have, all these other games are garbage. I mean, please, am I really going to look at Sacramento, Washington? And I understand they're fighting for that bottom rung there in the West. Yeah, that's all you pretty much have there for your early part of the NBA schedule. And that'll do it. No other news and notes. Celtics City, part 5 tonight. I know on Thursday's podcast I started to get into it, and I'll just briefly touch on it. The series is fantastic. Executive produced by Bill Simmons. Celtic fan extraordinaire, as you know. And tonight, I am fascinated to see, after a little birthday dinner, where I'll come home tonight and I'll watch, which will be the 83-84 season, the best NBA Finals that I've ever watched as long as I've been alive, and I was 15 years old. And I'll talk more about it as I'll remember it while watching the 5th part of the Celtics City documentary on Max. And here I am being a shill for Simmons and for Max and for the Celtics. But looking forward to that, and I'm sure I think it's going to chronicle not only the 83-84 series, but 84-85, and I think they're probably going to combine those two. I don't know if they're going to also talk about the 86 season, because that could be just an hour unto itself. And if they only talk about those 2 seasons, then I'm sure 85-86 will be a season unto itself, and then obviously the tragedy of Len Bias right after they won that championship. Or maybe they'll lump it all together. Who knows? But I'm looking forward to it, and I'll give you a little recap of that on Thursday's podcast. So certainly for the basketball fan, obviously the Celtic fan, if you haven't watched, shame on you. Definitely tune in to peep that. All right, now let me get to the NHLs. I lace up the skates and take a trip around the National Hockey League. And the one thing I thought about here over the course of the weekend, and in particular Friday night, that Brad Marchand who was traded at the deadline from Boston. We all know the spark plug, the water bug, the fire plug that he is, and what he was and what he meant to the city of Boston, winning a Stanley Cup championship there dating back to 2011, and also cup runs in 2013, 2019, etc. that fell short, of course, to the Blackhawks and St. Louis Blues. But for the Panthers, who have made some shrewd deals, the defenseman Seth Jones, and then bringing Marchand on board, which signaled to me that not only are they looking to repeat, and no surprise there after winning the Cup last year, but when you bring in a guy like Brad Marchand into a locker room that has a presence like that, in a one Matthew Tkachuk, and you have Alexander Barkov, who's been there forever, and Sam Bennett, and guys that are gamers, Carter Verhaeghe, and we know the players, and we know what they've done last year, and even the last few years. They went to a Cup 2 years ago and had a magical run before they lost to the Vegas Golden Knights. But to bring in a guy like Marchand, who contributed in a big way there Friday against the Utah Hockey Club, where he got the assist there on the overtime goal, which won the game there, and no big deal, it's against Utah regular season, but for him to make his mark, and granted it wasn't a game-winning goal, granted it wasn't against an opponent in their division that they're fighting for the top spot there and the 2 seed in the conference, whether it's Toronto as well as the Tampa Bay Lightning, who of course nipping at their heels. And as of right this moment, the Maple Leafs have surpassed them, but needless to say that the Marchand deal, I think, could be, not going to say it may be or will be, but could be the one ingredient that could propel the Panthers as the best team in the East once we get into the tournament. Now, people are going to say, whoa, Jay Reels, look what Toronto has done, considering that they've been shuffling the deck there. I understand with Florida and Toronto back and forth when it comes to them playing hot potato with the first place. And even though Tampa briefly was in first place, tied with the Florida Panthers, but people could say, wait a second, those two teams are just as stout and as formidable as a Panther team that did win a cup last year. And then you have people in the nation's capital say, whoa, time out, Jay Reels. We have a capital team that has just been steamrolling everybody. They have the second most points in the sport because now Winnipeg has 106. And I'm sure the Capitals want to keep it there at 103. They do not want the President's Trophy, as I mentioned here, time after time after time. But with Alex Ovechkin, and I'll get to him in a moment, but with the Capitals and what they've done this year have overachieved beyond anyone's belief. People are going to say, this is Ovi's year to not only break Wayne Gretzky's record, but also get to a cup final, maybe get to a Stanley Cup, and who knows, if he does get 895 and get to the top of Mount Gretzky, and now he'll have his own mountain as Mount Ovechkin when it's all said and done before the end of the regular season, and let's say they go on a long playoff run, win a Stanley Cup, dare I say, will he even call it a career at 39? Because how better can you go off getting the all-time goal-scoring record on top of winning a Stanley Cup, which would be his second in his career? How do you think the Florida Panthers are going to overcome that? Well, Marchand, I'm sure, now is going to have pep in his step. He's going to, I'm sure, give it all he's got. And yes, he has these ailments, and who knows, he could be one bad hit from being out on the shelf. But Marchand, and we all know hockey players, they are as tough as nails, probably the toughest in any sport. And that includes football. Yes, I did say that. That includes football. People get stitched up across the face, go in the locker room, and come back out with a shield. People get teeth knocked out in play, picking up their teeth off the ice. They go up, stitched up, back on the ice. Does that happen in the NFL? That doesn't really happen that often. And I understand it's a different contact sport from the NFL. I'm not trying to pile on the shield by any stretch, but hockey players are as tough as they come in any sport. So for Florida, I think Marchand is the perfect ingredient for this team to get back there. Now, like I said, could be the best team in the East. I'm not going to say right now that they are, and that's based on the teams that are ahead of them right now. Now, Toronto, as we all know, they have their own demons and just skeletons in their closet that they need to exercise, because they have not gotten past a conference semifinal in forever. And Tampa Bay, although they've had their early success there in the early part of this decade, I should say, and they had this long run there with the defenseman Victor Hedman and Nikita Kucherov, as well as their goaltender Andrei Vasilevsky, but who knows if the Lightning are going to have that bolt or that jolt to get themselves back to a conference final or even a Stanley Cup final. But Florida, I think they're going to be tough. And I think with Marchand, he is the perfect guy to be on that team. Whether or not they're going to be the best, we'll talk about that when we get to the playoffs. But I think right this very moment, I'd have to say they fall just a little bit short. Not to say they can't get to a cup or won't win a cup, but I think they fall short right now because the other teams, whether it be Washington, even Toronto, and even Tampa that they're currently tied with, maybe they're just that much more ahead of them at this very moment. And then you have Alex Ovechkin. Scored his 890th goal, 5 away from Wayne Gretzky or surpassing him. And listen, not to talk about that because I've mentioned this time after time after time, but he's on pace. And with the Capitals now have how many games left? 8 games, I believe. No, actually they have 9 games left, 5. He just needs to average at least a goal every other game, and he's good. Now, we talked about stretches. If he goes a game or 2 or even 3 games goalless, he's going to have to get multiple goals here, as we know. But right now, until it gets into that danger zone where, he has 6 games left and it's 5 goals, and he still needs to get those 5 goals, then we'll talk about it. But if he still continues to go at this pace, he's going to surpass Gretzky. And then the big question is, if he does win a cup this year, does he retire? Fascinating to say the least. So that's what you have there. And then, speaking of the Capitals, very classy move when they played the Wild the other day at the end of the game where, led by Alex Ovechkin, who of course is the captain of the Capitals, where Marc Andre Fleury is going to retire after this year, as we know, had the whole team there on the ice, and they went up to Fleury and they shook his hand just to congratulate him on a great career and a Hall of Fame worthy career. And I understand I may have questioned whether or not he's a Hall of Famer, and that's only because of dominance, people. That's not because of his long-standing 20-plus year career, winning Stanley Cups, getting to Stanley Cups, Vezina trophies, etc. But for Marc Andre Fleury, as we all know, bulk of his career in Pittsburgh, did play in Vegas. Obviously now with the Wild, all the credit, kudos goes to him, and just a classy job there by the Capitals. And then you also have a scenario where Sidney Crosby, speaking of Gretzky's records, now all of a sudden they're starting to fall by the wayside. Sidney Crosby has now guaranteed a 20th straight year of averaging a point a game, which only Wayne Gretzky has done. And by doing so, where he got an assist there the other night, he's going to surpass, or he already has surpassed Gretzky for that point per game total in 20 consecutive seasons. Just a remarkable job there. You can't even say Sid the Kid anymore, but Crosby, as we all know, and you can even argue, and this is also another debate type question, which I'm not really into, but you could actually wrap your head around. When you look at what Ovechkin's done and he's about to do, and what Crosby has done, winning 3 cups, MVPs, and records abound, do those guys even get a mention for a Mount Rushmore deal where you only know that there's 4 players that could be a part of that? Now, you have to take out the goaltender in this case, because if you add the goaltenders, forget about it. I mean, it's just going to be a jumbled mess. But you know you can't break these top 3. Gordie Howe, Wayne Gretzky, and Bobby Orr. Those you can't even think to wipe out. Now, the 4th one, you could argue until you're blue in the face. Mario Lemieux, who is probably, you would think, could be the 4th on that Mount Rushmore. You could put Mark Messier there. You could put Phil Esposito, if you wish, if you're an old school hockey guy. You could put Steve Yzerman there. You could put a ton of other players there that belong in that stratosphere. But Ovechkin, the all-time goal-scoring king in the history of the sport, you could certainly throw him in there. Or Sidney Crosby. And maybe you have to throw in that younger guy because Mario Lemieux, during his time, it was he and Gretzky. And obviously people are going to pick Gretzky over Lemieux, but Lemieux certainly doesn't take a backseat to anybody. But I know I'm going off the cuff here, but just an interesting sports talk fodder here for those out there who may be thinking that or wondering, or may say, yeah, you know what, Jay Reels? Interesting point. So if you marinate on that one, you could certainly do so and have some fun with that. Now, as far as the latest, everything is pretty much status quo, not to unpack or even go crazy with what's happening there. I know the Islanders lost another game to the Hurricanes, and they're going to have a tough stretch. They lost over the weekend in Tampa as well. They have a brutal schedule, as I talked about, so I don't think they're going to make it to the playoffs, although they are 3 points behind the Canadiens as of right now. But they have to leapfrog 4 teams in total, including the Canadiens. So they have the Rangers, who are tied with 77 points with the Canadiens, but they have a game in hand with the Rangers. That's why they have the second wildcard spot as of now. Columbus 75, Detroit 74, Rangers 74, and then the Penguins 71, but I won't include them at this very moment, despite the fact that they're 6 points behind. But with the teams playing anywhere between 7, 8, 9 games left of the season. There's still some time and some ground to make up, but time is running out fast, including for my beloved Islanders, so we'll see what's going to happen there. We talked about Toronto leading the division, 3 points over Tampa and Florida. We know about the Metropolitan. That's already a done deal. Winnipeg with 106 points. They right now look like they're going to be the President's Trophy's winner, even though Dallas is on the come up 6 points behind them, which they still should make it, but they have a sizable lead over Colorado, as they'll probably get the second seed or the first place seed that will go up against Colorado and have the home ice in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Colorado now is 7 points behind the Stars as of right this moment. And then out west, you have the Golden Knights, who have gotten some separation, have won 6 in a row. Now with a 7-point lead over the Kings, who have a 2-point lead over Edmonton in the Pacific. And as far as the wild card goes, you have the Minnesota Wild and the St. Louis Blues. And the Blues, as we talked about on Thursday, were on a 7-game winning streak. Now have won 9 in a row and have evened their record with the Minnesota Wild in the wild card mix. And that's big, because if you're St. Louis, you want to try to get to that one spot only because you will avoid playing Winnipeg in the first round. So, and Winnipeg, we get it. They had a big-time regular season last year, and boy, did they implode there against Colorado in the opening round, in particular their goaltender, Connor Hellebuck. But if you can avoid Winnipeg, please be my guest. And that's what I'm thinking the St. Louis Blues are doing, because they have the best record or the hottest team right now in the sport. And knowing that they're just technically a win behind them, because they do have 87 points. And although the Wild have a game in hand, you have to take that into consideration. But the rest of the field there, Vancouver now 6 points behind them, and Calgary is 7 points behind both. Or I should say both. Yes, I could say both, excuse me. Minnesota and St. Louis for those final 2 seeds in the wild card race out west. So we will see what's going to happen and take place there as we peek the schedule over the next few days. And we'll start off with tonight, where you have Minnesota at New Jersey. Good game there. Calgary at Colorado. Dallas at Seattle, only because I mentioned Dallas. But I'll talk more about the wild card teams in particular here. Washington at Boston, only because of Ovechkin. Florida at Montreal, big game for the Canadiens. Tampa at the Islanders, April Fools to who? Detroit at St. Louis. Edmonton at Vegas, so there you go in the division, although Edmonton is 1,000,000 points behind them at this current juncture. And then Winnipeg at LA to play the Kings. And then you have Minnesota playing the Rangers at the Garden. Washington at Carolina on a back-to-back. Florida at Toronto. There you go. Huge game there in the Atlantic, as they're going to need to make up some ground, as you know. And then Seattle, Vancouver, Colorado, Chicago. So that pretty much wraps it up. So you do have a few good games here to wrap your head around as we get here toward the final stretch of this regular season. And let's see who qualifies here for the playoffs. All right, now let me get in the batter's box. Baseball, the season is now 4 days old. And I have some storylines here that we could certainly take a crack at. No pun intended. And the first one I'm going to take a crack at are the New York Yankees. And the reason why I bring them up is because they had a monster weekend. They won on opening day 4-2. No big whoop there. Austin Wells, part of a trivia question, the first catcher on opening day to hit a leadoff home run. Yeah, that is a big-time trivia question, because 10 years from now, maybe even 10 months from now, is anybody going to remember that? And I'm not trying to rain on the Yankees parade by any stretch, but they're off to a 3-0 start. The Brewers 0-3, and I picked them as an over this year, so I'm off to an astounding start there. And I even picked the Detroit Tigers, and I'll get to them in a little bit. But the Yankees 3-0, and that barrage over the last 2 games. 32 runs, 13 home runs, 4 in the first inning off of Nestor Cortez, who shunned the media at the end of the game. And although he met the media there yesterday, but come on, Nestor, you got to do better job than that. I understand it could have been a better homecoming for him, but Nestor Cortez throwing up meatballs in batting practice to the Yankees there on Saturday when they got blown out 20-9. They hit 9 home runs in the game, a franchise record. But the rage over this onslaught, especially in the last 2 games, have been the bats. How these bats looking like torpedoes by this bat maker who I couldn't even tell you. But if you look at the bats, they almost look like, they're called torpedo bats, but they almost look like bowling pins. They're weird how, I guess, the barrel gets the ball Now, I'm not going to say it gets into a lot quicker because that's all dependent on the wrists and the bat speed of the batter that's in the box. But for whatever reason, you get a better square on the ball. And as we all know, in this day and age, everything is about launch angle and about exit velocity. So these torpedo bats or bowling pin bats, whatever you want to call them, supposedly have had this effect to where the Yankees have just mashed all over the place. To me, that's more of an indictment on the Brewer pitching. But here it was, 13 home runs and 2 games later, that the Atlanta Braves, who are off to a dreadful start in their own right, they've now ordered the bats themselves to see if they could add a little bit of just some fire, just some life to that Brave lineup. And not that the Brave lineup in any way is anemic, but considering that they got out of the gate losing 4 games in San Diego, and now they got to go up the freeway to play the Dodgers, they're going to do anything it takes, maybe even chop off a tree and just get the handle to the point where they can actually grip it. And if the tree trunk is the size of, who knows, a tractor trailer, I'm sure they're going to take that, because what we've seen here by the Braves so far have been surprising. 7 runs in 4 games, 0-4. And I get it, give credit to the Padres. And I was going to get to the Braves as well, but I figure why not? Only because they're ordering these bats. So therefore, it was an opportunity for me to say, all right, well, let's see if this is going to help out the Braves here if they get those bats in time in order for them to go up against a team in an LA Dodgers who I guess I could segue that to right now. Should I? I guess so. Well, here's your storylines. Yankees 3-0 right out of the gate. Bad Brewer pitching, 1 million home runs, torpedo bats, fine. Dodgers 5-0. The 2 games in Tokyo beating the Cubs, and now they sweep the Tigers out of Dodger Stadium. Roki Sasaki, not a great Dodger Stadium debut. 1 2/3 innings, walked the ballpark. I believe faced 12 batters and threw 61 pitches in the process. But that's all right, because the Dodgers still prevailed. They still have their bats. They still have a championship team that is probably looking to do even that much more better this year than they did last year. And let's face it, 5-0, just like the Yankees, but more so because they had the 2-game advantage in Tokyo, that they're on a pace to go 162-0. And now they have an 0-4 Brave team coming into Chavez Ravine that, who knows, maybe when it's all said and done, they could be 8-0 by the time we get to Thursday's podcast. And then we could really have the talk of 162-0. Of course, I'm kidding around, and I know it's a pre-April Fool's Day joke, but the Dodgers, are you surprised? I'm not, and they're looking to do big things this year, and right now, you couldn't ask for a better start, especially off of the heels of a World Series championship where a lot of these teams, and I understand it's not even 5 games in, a little bit of that hangover sets in, and a little bit of the puffing the chest out and the press clippings, etc. But that has not slowed down this team in the least. And then the other big story coming out of the weekend from the plus side are the Miami Marlins. And yes, the only reason why I'm bringing them up is because this will probably be the last time I give them any props this year. And I understand that's raining on the 20 Marlin fans that are out there. And understood it was against the Pittsburgh Pirates, so it's not as if they're going to be world beaters by any stretch, despite the fact that they have good starting pitching. But not only did they win their series and start off their year 3-1, but their 3 wins were all in walk-off fashion. Whether that be in extra innings, whether that be in regulation. So this is a team that you can't even pick out of a lineup. Let's face it, when you got guys like Xavier Edwards and Jonah Bride and guys like that, where one more time, this isn't a team that has Giancarlo Stanton, Marcell Ozuna, Christian Yelich, JT Realmuto. No, those guys are long out of the picture. And your lineup right now are a bunch of, let's face it, triple or 4A players. And I understand it's the Pirates, but all right, the Marlins 3-1, and the only reason why I bring them up, good start. They have done it not only in come-from-behind fashion, but also in walk-off fashion. Well, guess what? The Mets now go into Marlins Park, or Lone Depot Park, for 3 games starting tonight. And yes, it would have been a pleasure to be down there in Miami for my birthday, but that's all right, because I'll be watching from afar to see whether or not the Mets could get on track, because maybe they should order those torpedo bats, because their first 3 games, other than Soto hitting the home run there in game 2, and yes, he struck out there in game 1 to end the game against Josh Hader, and yes, right away people, he's not worth the money, so on and so forth. Come on. 1 game, 1 at bat, seriously? Pipe down on that nonsense for those who are either hating on Juan Soto or the Met fan that's already up in arms like, this has been a disaster. But the 5 runs in 3 games, unacceptable. Now, the pitching has been fine. They've only given up 6 runs. Granted that Clay Holmes did not pitch well in his first start, all over the place. But all right, fine. No problem there. But now the Mets 1-2 go into Miami. So let's see whether or not they can at least win 2 out of 3. Come home after a day off on Thursday. That's right. They're not going to open on Thursday and then have the day off on Friday, which is usually the case. They'll have the day off on Thursday and then open their stadium, Citi Field, to the home schedule there against the Toronto Blue Jays there on Friday. So, reason why I bring up the Marlins, good start, and with the Mets going in, so we'll see how they fare down near South Beach, or really in Little Havana. And then on the flip side of that, like I mentioned, Tigers 0-3 to start off the year, not the way they expected. Brewers start off the year 0-3, get blasted out of the Bronx. And then the Braves 0-4, 7 runs in the 4 games. I mean, what more can you add? What more can you say to those bad starts for teams that obviously made it into the postseason last year? So the starts that they certainly weren't hoping for or looking for, as they have a big goose egg in their column. And then in the National League, obviously the Dodgers 5-0. We also talked about the Yankees being 3-0. The Yankees are the only undefeated team in the American League as of right this very moment. And then in the National League, you have the Marlins, who are the top spot there in the NL East. The Cardinals 3-0. Who would have thought that? Even though the Cardinals, who had some easy pickings here over the weekend, let's face it, it's not as if the Cardinals, I get it, the Twins, a lot of people thought they're going to be feisty and they're going to be plucky, a team that will be in the mix in the AL Central, but certainly didn't show it this weekend, as they did not play well and got swept out of the Gateway City. So for the Cardinals to start off 3-0, tremendous for them. And the Padres 4-0, so you have a few teams there in the National League that are undefeated to start off the year. And the early schedule for this week, as we'll take a peek, you have Boston at Baltimore, as the Orioles will have their home opener. And I think they split the 4 games against Toronto over the weekend. Didn't they do so? I believe that was the case. Pittsburgh playing in Tampa. The only reason why I say that, because they stay in the state of Florida. So look at that. They've been in Florida since the middle of February, and they still haven't left after the first 2 series of the baseball weekend. Tampa did a good job this weekend with Steinbrenner Field all set up as Rays Park. So good job by them, beating the Colorado Rockies 2 out of 3, as they will host the Buccos here over the weekend. And yes, that Baltimore did split against Toronto, those 4 games up north of the border. And let's see. Yeah, other than that, early on, I know Braves-Dodgers is going to be interesting. We'll see what happens there. The Cubs will play the Athletics, the first games in Sacramento, so we'll see how that shapes down with the crowd, who will probably be about 12,000 as the A's, and I believe they split their series against Seattle over the weekend. So that's what you have. Detroit goes to Seattle. Let's see if they get their first win of the year. Cleveland at San Diego. And yeah, that's pretty much of any of note here when it comes to the schedule. The Diamondbacks play the Yankees starting tomorrow for a 3-game series. I just thought to throw that out there as I see that there. And Kansas City will play Milwaukee today in their home opener to try to snap that 3-game skid after leaving the Bronx. And then lastly, as I put on the helmet and shoulder pads, now that April is just a day away, I'm sure a lot of the draftniks are going to be looking forward about 4 weeks from, or what it'll be, I guess 3 weeks from this coming Thursday, the NFL draft. I'm not going to get into that right now, but the one thing I will get into are the Niners, because who knows, by tomorrow, I don't know what time, could be 5 p.m. is the deadline, but the Niners could possibly trade Brandon Aiyuk. Now, he's going to get a $22.5 million bonus tomorrow. Now, I believe it's 5 o'clock, could be earlier. Don't know the window or the time frame as to what that will be. But considering the purge that the Niners have had here over the last, let's face it, 3.5 weeks, would you be shocked that the Niners are not going to dangle Brandon Aiyuk, or there's going to be a team out there that is going to try to procure the wide receiver? Now, I think it's highly unlikely for 2 reasons. One, there's going to be a lot of dead cap space for the Niners to take on if they do trade Brandon Aiyuk, and they might as well just give him the $22.5 million bonus. But I guess what that will do is if they do get Aiyuk and whatever they get back, they're probably going to get, a 5th-round pick, maybe 4th. You also got to remember, he's coming off a torn ACL. So here's a guy that got his payday, sat out pretty much all through training camp, got the 4-year, $120 million extension, then gets hurt, I believe, week 6, tears his ACL. You would think he'll be back in time for training camp, but if the Niners are thinking, wait a minute, we got rid of, maybe not got rid of, but guys like Charvarius Ward and Jordan Mason and Dre Greenlaw and let me see if I can pronounce his name correctly. I think I have it here because I don't want to butcher his name. Everybody knows how I do with these names. Talanoa Hafanga. I know I was probably bad, people. My apologies. Deebo Samuel, who they traded, Javon Hargrave. I mean, the list goes on and on and on with the Niners. So why not even think that they may say, we're going to keep Brandon Aiyuk close to the vest. I get it. The injury is probably going to be a big question mark, and I understand they only have about 24 hours to make this trade in order for them to get him off the team. And like I said, they're going to have to deal with some dead cap money, you would think. But would I be surprised if Aiyuk isn't a member of another team tomorrow? I'll go on a limb and say I would be. Only because they just can't deplete this team. They got to have somebody of some semblance to come back. I understand they got to pay Brock Purdy a big amount. They're going to keep Christian McCaffrey. Obviously, got a lot on the books with him. And they have to have some semblance of the team. They just can't deconstruct this team and try to reconstruct it here in a matter of a year, especially when they have Kyle Shanahan, the head coach, and what he's able to concoct offensively. But Aiyuk, just to think that he could be out there for a trade, knowing the just unloading of this roster here over the last month and change, or less than a month or so, has been astounding. And I would have to say that I'd be surprised. So if he does get traded between now and tomorrow, I'd say I'd be shocked. Only because they might as well have me as wide receiver there next year. I mean, who's left there on that team that's going to be of any note, especially on the offensive side of the ball? As we know, Shanahan is a wizard there. So that's what you have. I'm not going to get into Aaron Rodgers' Pittsburgh stuff. I touched on that a little bit there on Thursday. If you missed that, please go back and listen to that podcast. But with that being said, that concludes a birthday podcast for yours truly. That's why I'm dressed up the way well, you already know that. Thank you so much to all of the followers, subscribers, supporters, fans, etc. As I thanked you 30 days ago during the 7th anniversary podcast of this J-Reels endeavor that I've been doing. But again, I cannot go without saying thank you to all. Continue your support, please. Your undying, unwavering support as I'm going nowhere. Talking about sports is what I love. Listen, I could have said, you know what, it's my birthday, I'm not going to have a podcast. I would have been stupid to do that. But here I am, putting forth my thoughts. Of course, everything that happens to do with what's going on in sports, opinions, etc., which I'll get to in a second. So one more time, people, thank you so much for stopping by, carving out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is I have to say about what goes on in the toy department of life of what happens in the world of sports. And one more time, people, for my birthday, the best gift that you could give me, please subscribe, rate, review, throw me a few stars, whatever it may be on all available platforms, whether that be on Apple, Spotify, whichever podcast platform, the YouTube channel, which I've been pushing day in and day out on YouTube at JReels. Please go subscribe there. Share it with your family, friends, foes, frenemies. Take screenshots. Share it with me. Share it with the sports fan in your life, whether he's the good, great, the borderline, the casual, the kook like yours truly, whomever it may be. If you could go ahead and do that, I would sincerely and gratefully appreciate that. And if you want to hit me up with a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the following: Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the JReels Podcast, Twitter, JReels1, just a number. The old-fashioned way, the JReelsPodcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, here's what I love to do, people. As you know, I quit my job almost 14 months ago to do this full time, trying to earn a living, blaze a path and a trail in this podcast universe to just do what I love, but also make a living. And that's where I need your help. So like I said, subscribe if you want to contribute in whatever way, shape, or form. Send a question, send a suggestion. And I know that may sound a little bit desperate, but you know where I'm coming from. Just support the podcast, people. This is independent podcasting at its finest. Where else are you going to get all these sports in one podcast, a little over an hour or less than an hour, depending on the day? Not only twice a week, but also a live stream every Wednesday on YouTube at high noon Eastern time. That's right, I'm not playing. I am out here doing whatever it is that I can to put forth not only a great product, not only a credible, informative, but more importantly, a product that you know your source for all the sauce in the world of sports that you can rely on and come to right here, J Reels. I am your guy. And as long as I'm sitting in front of this microphone and in front of this camera, you know I will do anything and everything to provide nothing but passion, fire, energy, fury with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the J Reels podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx to South Beach to South Central to South Pacific and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the J Reels podcast, on the flip, baby.